Who is Old Nan? How does she know so much? And is she always right? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. On this channel we cover A Song of Ice and Fire in full, as well as the wider world of Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon and Dunk and Egg. That's in addition to other great fantasy worlds like The Lord of the Rings and The Witcher. If that sounds good, there's a subscribe button around here somewhere. Who is Old Nan? Old Nan only really appears in passing in the books and in a couple of episodes of the TV show, but she casts a long shadow. Pretty much all of the Stark children think about her and her stories in their POV chapters, even several books later, often many times. She has had a lasting impact on their and our imaginations. For a long time, she seemed to be the only person who believed that there was any real threat from beyond the wall, regaling Bran with stories of the Long Night and the others when everyone else dismissed them as fairy tales, which has led some to speculate that there is something more going on with her, that she was preparing the Stark children for what is to come with stories that were true. Was she? Well, let's start by looking at who she is. We're told quite early on that she is the oldest person in Winterfell, perhaps 100 years old. She is as frail as you would expect of someone of that age, half-blind, without teeth, shrunken, almost bald, and, well, all you might expect from someone that old. No one seems to know exactly how old she is, or how long she's been a part of the Stark household, but we hear that she joined as a much younger woman as a wet nurse to a Brandon Stark after their mother had died in childbirth. Obviously, Bran is a very common name for the Starks. There's one in almost every generation, and Old Nan's vagueness on the subject doesn't help, but this was probably either Rickard Stark's brother, that's Ned's uncle, or his great-uncle. The fact that she was a wet nurse implies that she probably had a child of her own at that point, and settled in Winterfell to raise her family. Whatever her background before that, being one of the trusted retainers of one of the richest and noblest families in Westeros was probably as good a life as most commoners could hope for in that rather calcified feudalistic system. Although she is vague on the details, her life after that at Winterfell with her family is reasonably well documented. She had 2 sons, who tragically both died during Robert's Rebellion, and a grandson who died during the Greyjoy Rebellion a handful of years later. Her daughters had all moved away and died by then as well, leaving Hodor as her only relative. Bran described her as Hodor's grandmother's grandmother or something. In all likelihood, she's probably his great-grandmother or something like that, and that probably makes Hodor the son of the man who died in the Greyjoy Rebellion. He seems to be her only family left. There are also hints that perhaps we might have seen her in her youth in the books. When Bran starts to travel back in time through the weirwood tree at Winterfell, he sees this. Then there came a brown-haired girl, slender as a spear, who stood on the tips of her toes to kiss the lips of a young knight as tall as Hodor. The reference to the knight being as tall as Hodor is perhaps a hint that this is Hodor's ancestor we are looking at. Hodor's massive size must have come from somewhere, after all, and we do know one very tall knight who does apparently visit Winterfell at about the right time, Sir Duncan the Tall. The first 3 Dunk and Egg novels show that he has an eye for female company, shall we say, and when we last see Dunk and Egg in The Mystery Knight, they were on their way up to Winterfell. Those events take place in the year 211 AC, so the timing is pretty much bang on. And there was at least one Brandon Stark born around then whose mother died in childbirth. That's Brandon, son of Lord Willem Stark and his wife Lyanne Glover, so they would definitely need a wet nurse. It all fits together. Perhaps we'll get a fuller picture when we get the next Dunk and Egg story. Anyway, everything we know suggests a perfectly normal, if slightly tragic story of a woman who moved to Winterfell when she was young, had a family, then lost a family, and was retained even into old age by the Stark family in whose service her sons and grandson had died. Her life from young woman to the frankly very old woman we see in books 1 and 2 was witnessed daily by everyone in Winterfell. The Starks and the hundreds, thousands of others in Winterfell had known her and her family for generations, and the Starks trusted her generation after generation as nurse to their children. There's nothing to suggest anything odd in this story. And yet the fact that she seems to know so much has led to several colourful theories that she might not be all she seems. Some have suggested that she might be a skin changer, or someone working for Bloodraven to tell Bran the truth about the White Walkers, perhaps even Shira Seastar, Bloodraven's half-sister and lover. But the truth is that there isn't actually any convincing evidence that there's anything like that going on at all. And even if there were, this would be a ridiculously long-term plan. Staying in character for 8 decades or more while you grow old, in the distant hope that at the very, very end of your life you might be able to tell a few stories to a future Stark, seems speculative in the extreme. Surely if you know or suspect that an important Bran Stark would emerge, then you would be able to intervene a lot closer to the time than nearly a century beforehand, or even after he was born, as Bloodraven did himself by visiting him in his dreams and sending Jojen and Mira to get him. But perhaps the biggest mark against the idea that Old Nan is somehow entrusted with valuable information to pass on to Bran is the fact that she doesn't do a very good job of it. Seemingly no one believed her stories to be anything other than stories. Bloodraven himself did more to convince Bran of the truth of the others in one dream than Old Nan did in 1,000 stories. She might well have opened up his mind to the possibility of the others existing, but everyone in the North knew and told those stories. No, for me, the idea that Old Nan is someone entrusted with the task of convincing Bran of the truth of the others simply doesn't add up, both because of the length of time Old Nan was there in Winterfell and because she presented her stories as stories, not vital truths that Bran must learn for the sake of all humanity. Which doesn't mean that she isn't important to the story. Far from it. In fact, I think George R. R. Martin is doing something very subtle but significant with her character. Let's take a look at the stories she tells. There are the stories of the Long Night, of course. She talks of White Walkers on giant spiders, the Children of the Forest and the Last Hero. She has plenty of stories from the Wall, particularly the horrors of the Night Fort, the Night's King, the Racked Cook, Mad Axe and the Thing That Came in the Night. She also tells wider legends from the Age of Heroes. As well as the Last Hero and the Night's King, she talks of Simeon Star Eyes and of ice dragons. And there are some more recent bits of history that she talks about too, like the burning of Harrenhal and of Aerion Targaryen who thought he could turn into a dragon by drinking wildfire. These aren't stories targeted at Bran, or indeed at any of the Stark children in particular, because she told the stories to all of them, and probably anyone else who would listen. Old Nan's stories cover all of Westeros, and all through history. Most of them are not anything to do with the Long Night or the others. Her random wisdom has a northern bent to it, which you would expect from a northerner, but covers southern things as well, like the Red Comet heralding a dragon. And not all of her stories are true, at least as far as we know. Arya remembers her saying this about the Titan of Braavos. He was a giant as tall as a mountain, and whenever Braavos stood in danger, he would wake with fire in his eyes, his rocky limbs grinding and moaning as he waded out into the sea to smash the enemies. The Braavosi feed him on the juicy pink flesh of little highborn girls, Nan would say, and Sansa would give a stupid squeak. That's all not true, and Old Nan seems to have said that last bit simply because she wanted to tease Sansa, like she teased Bran that perhaps the Night's King was called Bran. She also claims that morning mists are the spirits of the dead returning to their graves, which is also pretty clearly not true. So Old Nan is not just spouting truths. She is telling stories and trying to provoke a reaction. She tells stories out of the sheer enjoyment of telling stories, always looking for hooks or opportunities to do so. You can see from some of those early Bran chapters how she just loves telling tales and will start up on a new one or repeat an old one given the slightest chance. So she is telling stories, keeping the ancient stories alive for another generation. Which, as I said, doesn't mean she isn't important. In fact, I would argue that literarily, she is one of the most important characters of the first book. She represents the narrative oral tradition. The North remembers, we hear, but the North acts as if it has forgotten. She remembers. The stories remember. We are told that the first men didn't record things with ink on paper. Instead, this is how the truth was passed down from mother to daughter and father to son, through stories, fireside tales and legends, embellished or simplified over time, but retaining their central truths. That's how all peoples have preserved their culture across time. Stories, legends, are about teaching morals, binding a people together with a shared heritage, or explaining why things are as they are. The legend of the rat cook that she tells is about teaching the importance of observing guest rights. The burning of Harrenhal teaches about hubris and false confidence, as well as how scary dragons are, and so on. These are stories that are told to all children everywhere in Westeros, not just to the Starks. They were shared stories, not just Old Nan stories. That said, there is a common thread running through the tales Old Nan chooses to tell. They are all fantastical in some way. Nameless monsters, legendary heroes, ghosts, dragons and White Walkers. Her stories are in intentional, stark contrast to the low fantasy setting of Book 1. In Book 1, A Game of Thrones, all of the characters who are presented as wise in some way, Maester Luwin, Tyrion and so on, scoff at these tales, but they are wrong. In other words, George R. R. Martin used Old Nan as a flag to alert the reader that there is magic in this world, that there are truths to be found in stories and fables, that we should look for echoes of these things in the story to come. The importance of guest right in the story of the Rat Cook foreshadows the horror of the Red Wedding. The fear and terror of dragons shown in the story of Harrenhal will surely be echoed in Dany's dragons in the last 2 books of A Song of Ice and Fire. And that's not all that George R. R. Martin used Old Nan's character for. She is a microcosm of the way in which the world of Ice and Fire echoes through history. We have had one long night, and we will have another. We see echoes of one Mad King in others. Maester Aemon's struggles to choose between love and duty are echoed in Jon Snow and Ned Stark and many others. On one level, Old Nan's lack of care about which Brandon Stark she is talking to because they all merge one into another in her mind is perfectly natural in someone her age. But on another level, this is the story that George R. R. Martin is telling. She is foreshadowing of what we learn about the weirwood trees. She is seemingly ageless, the depository of humanity's history, lore and knowledge, like the weirwoods are for the children of the forest. And for her, time blurs into one and ebbs and flows, one Brandon Stark after another, and all at the same time, history repeating itself. As Bloodraven says to Bran, "Time is different for a tree than for a man. Sun and soil and water, these are the things a weirwood understands, not days and years and centuries. For men, time is a river. We are trapped in its flow, hurtling from past to present, always in the same direction. The lives of trees are different. They root and grow and die in one place, and that river does not move them. The oak is the acorn is the oak, and the weirwood, 1,000 human years are a moment to a weirwood, and through such gates you and I may gaze into the past." And Old Nan lives on. Regardless of whether she still is alive in the books, and that's not clear, her stories, wisdom and knowledge have already been passed on. The Stark children still remember what she taught them, and they will pass the stories on to their children. That is how the North, everyone, remembers the past and interprets the present. Old Nan is important not because there is some dark secret about her to be deciphered. She is important because she embodies the narrative oral tradition. It is how humans have always understood the world. We tell stories. What do you think? Do you agree? Let me know in the comments below. If you'd like more videos digging into George R. R. Martin's world of Ice and Fire, please do check out the playlist on the left of your screen now. Or if you'd like to support this channel, the best way to do that is by clicking on the link to Patreon on the right of your screen. Thanks for watching. That's all for this time. I'll see you again soon.